I sat at the bedside of a friend this week who was quite literally on his deathbed. This once vibrant man, life-giving, joking, slap you on the back, tell you a story, be a little slightly rude about it a lot of the times. His breath was labored as he lay there sleeping, and I knew it wouldn't be long. I walked in the room and could see the color of his face had changed from what I had seen just the week before. It was that gray look, that look of death. I'd heard about it, but I don't think I'd ever seen anybody that close. The color changes. It wasn't just pale, it was gray. And I walked out and I talked to the hospice nurse who was there, and I said, when they get this way, how long? She said, I don't know. It could be a day, it could be 2 weeks, but it'll be soon, she said. I sat there knowing that he was dying. My friend of nearly 25 years, Dallas Plese, passed away this week on a Tuesday morning, early in the morning. I knew that there was that time was coming. We'd seen it. Everybody knew about it. But it's another thing when it hits. He was a mentor. He was a friend. He was my second dad, I called him. He called me, and I'm sure a bunch of other men, the son he never had. And I think of his life and the impact that he made and the investment that he made, giving so freely, and he was laying there dying. I want to welcome you to the Next Stage podcast. It's a podcast that's made just for men, to be a resource to men in the things that matter most in life. We summarize that by saying summiting life's climb. It's excelling in the most important things in life. And I want to invite you to lean into today. Today is a little bit of a different tone than most. It is kind of a eulogy. I probably won't get to eulogize him at his funeral. There'll be other people who do that. It's a life lesson wrapped in story, wrapped in application around the friend who modeled to me what it means to be a man who goes before. That phrase comes out of a statement that my friend Justin uses all the time, men who go before. And it means men who have gone before you, who are a little farther down the road than you, maybe several years. Him probably close to 25 years or 30 years down the road from me. But who are down the road, who have been through what you're going through now. They've got the wisdom, they've got the experience, they've got all of that. They are men who have gone before you, and yet don't just leave you in their dust. They come back and they help you walk through that. So I want to wrap eulogy, storytelling, examples, and a life lesson for us today in talking about men who go before. Here's how Dallas did that as a man in my life who went before me. I walked into a pub in Niwot called Flanagan's. It was about 25 years ago. And there was a new place in town, and I went there with a buddy and was a beer drinker at that time. It was before I discovered hard liquor and before I discovered that I lost the privilege of drinking, as I've talked about a lot on this show. But we walked into this pub. It was packed. I think it was like the opening day of the pub. And the place was packed, and my buddy and I, the only place we could sit was right in front of the beer taps because that was the only place that was open. The bartender comes up, gives us a beer, and, we're sitting there talking about work and whatever. And, well, I looked down, and my beer magically got empty. I don't know. There was a hole in that glass that day. And ran out of beer, and I'm looking, and I'm waiting, and it's a busy day, and people are running around. And I tend to be one of those guys who is just kind of innovative, I call it. Kind of solves problems on their own, very practical, innovative type of guy. So I reached around the beer tabs and stuck my mug, pulled the handle, and beer was coming in the glass. And right about that time, out of the kitchen comes a woman who easily 20, 25 years older than me, blue eyes that quickly turned to like this fire, like gonna get you, gonna rip your head off red color. And she looks at me and she was like, "Hey, what are you doing? I should kick you out of here. We could lose our liquor license for that. We're a brand new place. What are you doing?" I quickly, like you can imagine, started backpedaling, went belly up about as quick as any guy could go, apologizing, groveling, and somehow, I don't know, for whatever reason, she didn't kick me out. But instead, she yelled at a guy across the bar, "Hey, get this guy straightened out, will you?" And I turn around and I look, and there's a guy standing in the corner. And he looks at me and kind of motions me his direction. And he said, "Listen," he said, "don't piss her off. She's nice, but she can be mean as a snake. She will kick your ass out of here, so straighten up." And I looked at him, I apologized again. I said, "Sir, it will not happen again, I promise." He stuck his hand out, looked me in the eye, smiled, and said, "Hi, my name's Dallas Plese. My wife and I, Mary, run this place." What he really meant to say was she was the one that wore the pants in the situation for sure. But that was the day I met Dallas and his wife, Mary, and I could not project at that time where things would go other than a random meeting at a place called Flanagan's, where it would end up 25 years later. Things did grow. And they grew in a way that I could never imagine because of critical things that Dallas did that made that situation turn. Shortly after that, I walked into another group of men at a local church that was growing and just kind of blooming in size, and they needed somebody to lead a men's ministry at the time. And there were several men who were like, "Yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We need somebody to help us." And I was like, "Hey, I'll jump in here." Now, mind you, this is not beer thief turned evangelist story or anything like that. There's nothing dramatic here. The beer thievery is kind of just a one-time thing. But I took a leadership role with a number of different men. Mike, who works on the podcast with me here, was one of those, and Dallas was another one of those. It was a group called Men's Fraternity, and Dallas was one of those men. He was cooking eggs in the morning for our breakfast. He was setting up. He was recruiting men. He was just kind of this connector, and I was one of the men that he took interest in. In fact, it took us a while to connect the dots that day of that episode, the day in Flanagan's. But here's what he did. He took interest in me. I was a man in my late 30s at the time, I believe. He was in his mid to late 50s at the time. He took interest in me and quickly found out that I was a girl dad. He was a girl dad too. Had two, I had three. His were adults out of the house at that point. Mine were in elementary and middle school. And he goes, "Oh man, you got some stuff coming." And I'm like, that's what I hear. But he took interest in me. He asked me to join him one time for breakfast. And I loved breakfast. At the time, I could eat a whole lot more calories. My metabolism was quite a bit faster than it is now, and so could put down some food for sure. But he just began to ask questions. "Rob, what's going on? How are you doing? How's marriage? How's work?" I was in a graduate program at the time, trying to get through 70 graduate credit hours in 2 years. It's quite the task. I tend to bite off some pretty big bites. So we talked a lot about that. And he began to just share stories. To share stories about his life as a manager at IBM, about his early career, about how he got where he was in life, about a divorce he went through, about some addiction that he had and how he conquered those things and how he was actively working on it. It wasn't like a done story in several years in the past, but was vulnerable with stuff that was going on. Talking about girls, his daughters, my daughters, about marriage, about playing sports growing up, about refereeing at CU at the University of Colorado as a college football coach. Dallas was becoming that man who is gone before. I didn't even have that phrase in my mind at the time, but he was becoming that. Breakfast meetings became more frequent. I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. Frankly, I had some big questions going on in my life, and I was like, I'm not sure how to do this. And he was just a guy I could lean on who would listen, ask questions, tell stories, and he took interest. As I think about it, Dallas's life and how it applies to you as a man who is leaning into growing, I want to challenge you with something that he modeled right there. I didn't even realize what was going on. He didn't read a book on it. He didn't have a master's degree or a doctoral degree or whatever, but here's what he did. He was the man who had gone before. And I want to challenge you to be a man who has gone before in someone else's life. I want to challenge you to just take a look at this masterful technique of getting involved in people's lives, of showing interest, of asking questions, of sharing stories. You didn't really need a strategic plan. You didn't need a committee. You didn't need a big budget. You didn't need a degree. He only needed to have a place, an environment where things happened. And I want to challenge you to be men who go before, who simply pick up that example that he showed of showing interest, asking questions, and sharing stories. Do you see how simple that is? Older men, as you listen to this, I want to challenge you not just to approach the end of your career and think, man, I've earned so much. I have the right to just invest in myself and golf and fish and hunt. And I hope you do all those things. But how much effort does it take to show interest in somebody else who's like you? To ask questions, to share stories, and to be there for other men. Middle-aged men, I wonder if you are doing that with younger men. Younger men who are in your 20s or even late teens, are you doing that with even younger men? I think about the example of my son-in-law, Cody. This guy has a busy life. He's in his second year of marriage. He's in med school. He's in his clinical rotations. He's applying for residency programs, and yet he goes to youth group meetings to hang out with middle school boys. He hangs out with them. He does social stuff with them. He goes to games that they have. He hangs out with them. I see them on the front row at church, and I think, man, what a cool guy. And I think back, like I had older men, I thought they were so wise. But when I was in middle school and high school, who had gone before, who were just there. And I think of what they're doing. Coda is doing just that. He's showing interest, he's asking questions, and he's sharing stories. Cody is becoming a man who has gone before. The challenge I want to give you, just even out of this segment of Dallas's life that he modeled to me, was that he be a man who has gone before. It's not that hard. Just choose an audience that you're interested in. It doesn't matter. Are they athletes, younger men at work, engineers, med students, special needs? It could be a serving group. It could be the Cub Scouts. It could be coaching a baseball team, a soccer team, a football team. It could be anything. Find what you're interested in. Be a man who shows interest, ask questions, and share stories. If you do that, you will be involved in some of the things in life that matter most. Because you will be around for some of the things that are most critical in life. Here's how Dallas did that in my life. Dallas and I continued to be friends, cultivated a friendship. It was every couple weeks, once a month, something like that. No real regularity, but breakfast meetings. My dad, my first dad, irreplaceable in my life. I love him dearly. He lives across the country. Dallas came on in a really unique space of being that older guy, though, who very different from my dad personality-wise. I get other things from him. But Dallas was just a different guy. He had a different role. He was more of a specialist in other areas that my dad may not have been able to fill, which is perfectly fine. No dad can fill 100% of those things. But I started to call him my second dad. He told me he loved me frequently. Every time I saw him, I was like, I love you too, man. Give him a big hug. After completing my master's degree, I took on a very challenging role in a church that was trying to make like a 180-degree turnaround from where it was headed and be more relevant and applicable, I guess, in the town that they served. And so I jumped into this role headlong, and Mike, it's funny, who's part of this podcast, was part of those that episode in our lives. 4 years, we just went for it. There was lots of financial challenges. There were leadership missteps that I owned. There were marital pressures. There were daughters who were quickly becoming teenagers, and many, many, many other factors that led to me taking a step back and just going, you know what? I cannot do this. As you can imagine, there was a lot of disappointment in those days. Stepping out of something that you had planned for and you had dreamed about and you had seen fall, and maybe you've had something like that in your life. It just kind of fell apart. Once again, Dallas was one of those men who was just in my orbit, who knew what was going on because we were in relationship with each other, and he was just there to talk about this season of disappointment and next steps. And I got into a new career just a couple months before the subprime mortgage crash, okay? Those of you who remember the Great Recession, this was the era. Let me explain to you that I am kind of the buy high, sell low guy. It was the building materials industry, which had gone through a couple-year downturn, and it was like, you know what? This thing just always turns around and it shoots back up, and it'll be a great step, and thought really good. It was a good calculated step. Definitely had prayed about it, sought wise counsel. But I jumped into it 2 months before the subprime mortgage crash, which meant that 3 out of every 4 starts in housing in the U.S. were gone. The industry literally shrunk by 75%. And we were scrounging, and we were trying to figure it out. And I was like, I can work hard enough and just outpace this. I know how to work hard. I know how to put effort in. My parents had modeled that for me my whole life. So I was like, I know how to grind. But it was weighty, and there was disappointment that was in that. I was trying to outrun some things in my own life. And Dallas and I, one time at a breakfast meeting, he challenged me. He said, you know what? How much are you drinking? And I was like, oh, man, I got this. I'm good. It's good. Totally lying to the guy. He looked at me and he said, you know, my friend, the answer to those issues that you're facing is not found in the bottom of a bottle. I was like, oh, I'm good. I appreciate that. I got it. A few months later, maybe a year later, I don't know how long it was, I was at a men's retreat, and the dam that had been building up There was a mix of sadness and sorrow and disappointment and a sense of failure and all of those things that was being covered up in alcohol at that time in my life. That dam broke. And I was like, I've got to figure out how to live a different way. I sat and talked with another friend of mine, Dan, about that and just kind of walked through this whole thing. But what I did when I came back from that retreat was probably one of the best things I ever did. I called Dallas. I said, Dallas, I need you. What's going on, bud? We spent the next several months sitting at his kitchen table, one-on-one, talking through the 12-step book that really was just more than just AA or something like that, but it had some spiritual roots to it, and it had a framework behind it that really touched my life. And he said, well, why don't you go to one of these groups that are going on? There were lots of those types of groups at our church. And I said, no, I just want to sit here with you. I said, I'll try to be the most outstanding recovering guy in the whole world. And I'll try to fix everybody else in the room. I just want to sit here with you. And we did. We sat there at that table, and for weeks, I just talked through my life. We went through the questions that were in this book. And you know what he did? He showed interest. He asked questions. And he shared stories, telling me that it was going to be okay if I did the work necessary. He was one of the men in my life who was there when I needed him the most. Men that go before do that. They're there when you need them the most. But what they do is they've set a context of relationship that's there when you need it the most. I wonder, man, who is there in your life when you need someone the most? Do you cultivate any sort of relationships like that? Do you have anyone that is your go-to person in life? Do you have anyone that you can reach out to when you hit bottom? Or, like 99.9% of men do you go it alone? Talking about more than just beer drinking buddies or bourbon buddies or golf buddies or whatever, ball busting buddies, whatever they are. I'm talking about men who are there when you need them the most. Do you have anyone in your life? Men who go before are there when you need them the most. Recently, a story of another man I know. I lost somebody very, very, very precious in his life. It was a sudden death, and he managed everything the best he could. He went back to his house, and guess who was there? 4 of his friends. He walked in the door after managing the situation as best he could, and he fell into the arms of men who loved him and supported him and were there for him. Mind you, these guys are not like the most spiritual guys on the planet. They're not like the most emotionally open and, emotionally available and all that kind of stuff. But they had just cultivated friendships over the years that allowed there to be a context of being there when it mattered the most. I wonder, do you have any men in your life like that? The application that I can pull from this whole story about Dallas and this other friend of mine, find men like that in your life. Where do you find these guys? I don't know, but you do it intentionally. You could find them at church. Many of you go to church and you've kind of been doing just surface life with people for a long time. How about if you pull some guys aside and say, hey, I need confidentiality. Can you be confidential? Yes or no? Sign here. And then just begin to talk about things that matter. Maybe it's an older man at work, a guy you know that's just different. Maybe it's the marshal at the golf course. I don't know who it is. Maybe it's emailing us at the next stage and just saying, hey, listen, I need somebody in my life who's gone before. Go ahead and shoot us an email, the next stage at Sherpa5280.com. Just email us and say, listen, I need someone like that in my life. Where do you find a man who has gone before? I'll bet they're right around you. Well, how do you do that? Gosh, how do you do that? You start asking them questions. You start asking them questions. Hey, you've been through layoffs before, right? How did you handle that? You've been through a divorce before. Man, this is really hard. How did you walk through that? I've heard you talk about going through some recovery stuff before. Can you tell me about that? How did you raise kids? How did you recover from financial disaster? How did you, whatever? Just start asking men questions. You may even have to teach somebody the value of what they have. You may just have to lay it out for them like, listen, you've been somewhere I've not been before. You're one of these men who have gone before. What does that mean? You've gone before me in this. You've set you've walked this path. Can we just have a conversation? You may just have to communicate value to them. But Dallas, no doubt, was a man who was there when I needed him the most. And not only that, he intentionally built the groundwork for allowing me to be there when he needed someone the most as well. I don't want to make myself the hero of this story. I just want to tell you what happened this week. Many people were around Dallas in this time frame. His wife, his daughters, guys that he refereed football with, people who love him dearly, not just me. But I got to be there for him and be one of those people. See, Dallas I continued our friendship over the next decade. As he reached his middle 70s, his age started to catch up. He ran into some issues. I wouldn't just pick him up from breakfast anymore. I would pick him up to put him in my truck to go to breakfast because he had vertigo really, really bad. And he was walking with a walker and he's got really weak and he started to lose memory and was showing signs of breakdown, right? A few months ago, he suffered a stroke and was in a nursing home for a while. Speech was slurred. Side of his body was not paralyzed, but recovering. He was on a liquid diet for a long, long time. And I got a text one night from Mary, and he said, you know what? He had to go to the hospital. Things don't look good. I was like, oh, no. They eventually brought him home. They call it comfort care now. It's what we used to call hospice. But what it means is, hey, listen, let this guy go home and just live out the rest of his time and stop the heroics because he's on a path here that leads to him eventually dying. So Mary brought him home. Wasn't really sure, I don't think, where he was at a lot of the time, but we go to visit him in his house. It was better than the nursing home, of course, but walking in his room, and I questioned Mary, and I was like, does he really know that I'm here? And she goes, oh, yeah, he knows who you are. I was like, all right. About a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I got a text saying, hey, he's not eating at all. Could you bring some food over? Or maybe just you and a couple other guys being around to bring some food would help him to eat. And so I grabbed some Jimmy John's, and he threw down this guy like 3/4, maybe half of a roast beef sub. And Mary said that was the best he'd eaten in a long time. And I said, did I win? She goes, what? I go, it's all a competition. Did he eat more for me than anybody else? She goes, oh, yeah. I go, okay. I got another text last Sunday night. It said, Dallas continues to decline. God is about to welcome him home. And I was heading out of town this week on Monday to go on a business trip. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to let this one go, because I don't know if I'll get to say goodbye. So I went to his house that morning before I left, and I sat on the side of his bed. I told him that I loved him. I told him how important he was in my life. I said, man, I don't know if you know this. I don't even know if he could hear or understand what I was saying. But I said, I don't know if I would be alive if it weren't for you. I don't know. I know I would have probably lost a job, a marriage, a driver's license, a lot if it weren't for you. And I just began to express emotion around that. I told him I was on a dangerous path, and thank you. I prayed for him, and he gripped my hand. Oh, gosh, I wish I had a picture of that. He gripped my hand. I know he knew. And I said, it's okay. You can go. I prayed that God would take care of him and God would take care of Mary. And I sat there just weeping on his bed. I couldn't understand a word he was trying to utter, mostly groans. But this old guy, his eyes kind of opened up. He blinked away sleepiness. He looked me in the eye and he slurred out the words, "What the hell's the matter with you?" Nothing else he said for that hour was even understandable. But I was like, you turkey man, that ornery guy is still in there looking at me crying beside his bed and saying, "What the hell's the matter with you?" Oh, Dallas. I left that room that day with a gift, knowing that this old man who was on his deathbed, whose last words to me were, "What the hell is the matter with you?" Oh. Dallas was there for me when I needed him the most. He gave me the gift of allowing me to be there when he needed me the most. Men, that is the best stuff in life. It's the best stuff. Giving and receiving a friendship, being connected with another man who has gone before you, and living out the fruit of that and experiencing that joy. That is the best stuff in life. There's the verse, gosh, that I thought about this week as I drove away from his house. Proverbs 17:17 says, "A friend loves at all times." A friend loves at all times. A friend is there, cultivates things so that when you need them the most, they're there. The second part of that verse says, "And a brother is born for adversity." A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Man, I want to challenge you, encourage you. This was not written in Hollywood. This was written in real life over a period of 25 years. Get serious about investing in people's lives. Get serious about finding a man who has gone before you in life. Get serious about putting yourself in environments where you can be that man who has gone before. You do that through taking interest, through asking questions, and through sharing stories. Thank you for being part of this episode of The Next Stage. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to just be able to share this with you. And if this has meant something in your life, I would appreciate it. I'd be most grateful if you would share it, like it, pass it on, forward it. But I also invite you to join us for the next episode as we jump into a topic that, gosh, has touched so many men's life, is epidemic in our culture today, and that's the subject of pornography. We're calling this series Freedom from Porn, and I invite you to be part of that. Thanks for joining us. Go be awesome in your world today, and we will see you on the next episode of The Next Stage.